Welcome to the FAFSA Leadership Lounge, where we dive into the policies shaping the work of Florida's school leaders. I'm Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janice Lewitt, lobbyists for FAFSA and several school districts across the state of Florida.
So last week was definitely a busy one for us to get started on discussing. And of course, biggest national news was the reopening of the federal government. The 43-day shutdown was the longest in history. So some things are going to take a little bit of time, if not days and weeks, to return to normal. But all the government entities are starting to function normally again, including the Department of Education, the military, and airports and air traffic controllers.
That is sure a relief, especially considering as we're heading into the travel season. I think people were very concerned about what that might mean.
Thanksgiving is one of the most traveled holidays. Did you know that?
I did not know that, but it would have made it rough if we didn't have the
all those flights canceled.
All those flights canceled. It'd just be a mess. So thank goodness. Let's get to some Florida news. And there is certainly a lot of it, even though we did not have a committee week last week. But we did have a State Board of Education meeting, and they met on Thursday with a very full agenda. The meeting lasted almost 5 hours, and the majority of it revolved around discussions on regarding the Alachua County School Board, and particularly their culture. The commissioner has obviously been very critical of some comments that have been made by board members in Alachua on social media, and has just continued to have that conversation since that time.
Yeah, so that's right. So this is, I think, the third, if not the fourth meeting where the board has had conversations with the Alachua County School Board. This last meeting, they more focused in discussion with Vice Chair Tina Certain. She was called to address some comments that she made on social media about Charlie Kirk. Of course, she was working to defend why she would post things. And in her comments, she mentioned that it was rhetoric that was intended to mirror the racial rhetoric that she had heard Kirk mention in his speeches. So a little tension, of course, at this meeting.
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that the State Board of Education members did not seem to agree with her position. And so while she spoke and defended herself, then the vast majority of the board's comments were critical of what she had done.
Yeah. And I know we had a number of members from the audience that were also there to comment on the situation, whether they supported her or were in opposition. But at the end of the day, the board intends to keep their eyes on Alachua County, make sure that they're moving forward. They also talked about Leon County, and more specifically, the commissioner in his comments talked about the teacher salary increase, and that the allocation for increasing teacher pay has been in place for 5 years. And every year he said that Leon County Schools has missed the October implementation deadline. He has been critical both of leadership and of the teachers union along the way. He attended the local school board meeting in October to share how he was not impressed with the proposed $40 teacher salary increase.
So that was quite a meeting. And there was actually even more that occurred during that meeting. Florida became the first state to adopt what is called the Phoenix Declaration Framework for Education Principles. So what does this mean? I don't think many people have probably heard of this. But they are, I guess, guiding principles for education that were developed by the Heritage Foundation in collaboration with public officials, education scholars, and policy experts.
So the DOE said in the meeting that 50 education policy experts and scholars, along with 10 public and educational interest groups, signed on to the declaration, envisioning an education system that would reflect the growing principles that we're going to talk a little more about. So first and foremost, parental choice and responsibility, making sure that we know parents are the primary educators of their children, and that public education funds should always follow the child.
And that's certainly an interesting one, given the conversations that we know the House Education Appropriations Subcommittee has been having about money following the student. Certainly, I think that committee seems to agree with those principles as well. That the public education fund should follow the student to wherever they're going, whatever their choice option is.
When we look at transparency and accountability, which is the next section, schools must be fully transparent with parents about curricula, policies, and their students' well-being.
That's right. And I think we've seen a lot of policy here in the state in the last couple of years that really tries to get at that particular bullet, that or guiding principle, I should say, that we have to have transparency. Parents need to know what their students are seeing and learning in schools. And so we've kind of already been on that path. Florida has. This just kind of, I think reinforces it.
Absolutely. So, truth and goodness is the next one. Students deserve an education grounded in objective truth, free from ideological fads, and oriented towards the pursuit of the good. So I think that's something we'll continue to see, as certainly leadership has the opportunity to build out what those standards look like. And we'll talk more about some standards updates in a few minutes too. Next, cultural transmission. Students should learn about America's founding principles and roots in the broader Western and Judeo-Christian traditions. Students should study the best competing viewpoints that comprise our intellectual heritage.
Interesting. So, and I think we've seen some movement on that too in a policy perspective, that we've seen bills that have been introduced that essentially are supporting that as well. So,
and like the Holocaust education, right, that we've talked about, I feel like for almost a decade now. Yes. Maybe we've just been in this a long time, but
I think
those things have certainly been moving for a little while.
That's right. And it looks like they also look at character formation, that schools have to prepare children for the challenges and responsibilities of adulthood by cultivating virtue, personal responsibility, and self-discipline.
Self-discipline would be great. I know. Not to make light of the situation, but we do know that our schools certainly are facing a lot when it comes to discipline in our schools, but also just building out amazing people for the future of our society, right? And setting those expectations. When it comes to academic excellence, schools should prioritize proven teaching methods and a content-rich curriculum rooted in foundational subjects over fads or experimental teaching methods. So stick to the standards.
Stick to the standards, which has kind of been the mantra. It's certainly what we're doing. The standards obviously are set by the state. Then the assessments that we have are there to assess whether or not the students have learned and achieved proficiency with the standards. So we're lined up to follow that, I think,
for sure. And last on the list is citizenship, and that schools should teach students the civic virtues and knowledge necessary for self-government, including the value of civil disagreement. Students should learn the whole truth about America, its merits and failings, without obscuring that America is a great source of good in the world. So just really supporting, I think, a lot of the dialogue that we've seen over the last few years.
Absolutely.
Florida has been in alignment with this a while.
I was going to say, I can't imagine that this will change dramatically what's happening in the state, because we have already really been following those principles without them necessarily being put on paper.
Right.
The state board also approved new social studies standards for how the history of communism is taught to Florida middle and high school students. And the adoption of the framework put forth, this was also by Heritage Foundation. This comes after Governor DeSantis signed a bill into law last year that requires 45 minutes of instruction about communism on Victims of Communism Day, which is November 7th.
So also, last Tuesday, so stepping away from the state board meeting, but looking at some other things that happened last week, on Veterans Day was the day that charter schools could start expressing their intent to open schools of hope, which is the opportunity to co-locate in our traditional public schools. They will share space that is in underused buildings and or have the ability to take over failing district-run schools. So early Tuesday morning, for instance, Broward County School District received 127 requests from 4 different charter school providers to begin this process for the 27-28 school year. Palm Beach County also received 69 requests to share space on 46 different campuses. And part of why they wanted to be first is because when it is determined that there is underused space, those organizations that submitted their application first will have first right of refusal in that process.
That's right. I think we can bet that this is going to be an issue that we are talking about through the legislative session. I mean, that's a tremendous number of requests, 127 just to one school district. So you imagine across the state, we're talking about a lot of districts that receive these. So how this is all going to actually work in practice as opposed to just theoretically talking about it from a policy perspective, it's definitely going to have an impact on our schools, to be sure. So I imagine we will continue to talk about this as it plays out through the legislative session.
Yep.
And that's just going to keep following that issue as we do all the rest of the policy issues that we think will impact our members. And certainly we ask for any feedback if you happen to be a leader at one of these schools that received your request and then go through the process. I think we'd love to hear about what that experience is like and what issues you may be coming across as you work through this. So this is brand new to everybody.
Yeah,
so,
I would imagine for the FAFSA members that'll be here for our advocacy conference in January, they may even get questions from their legislators about this process and what are they doing locally for sure.
That's
right. But I know we wanted to talk a little bit of politics.
Let's talk politics. So we know looming large over this upcoming legislative session is, of course, the elections in 2026. Probably the one that's going to get the most attention is the race for governor, because, of course, Governor DeSantis is term limited out. So we've got a whole group of individuals who've thrown their hat in the ring. And one of them is Congressman Byron Donalds, who was a former House member here at the state level before his turn to go to the U.S. Congress. And he got an endorsement from another congressman, Congressman Roy, who said, Byron Donalds is a fearless American first conservative who will protect Florida's freedoms, grow its economy, and lead with strength. So he has been a longtime ally and fan of Donald's, and he actually even said that he should be Speaker of the House. And so he's a fan.
And, it's one of the first of many major endorsements that I'm sure we'll talk about. We're going to do a special episode of the Leadership Lounge around the governor's race and all the dominoes that may fall following that.
Yes.
But, we've got less than a year to go until 2026 election, lots of work to do. And while our topics have been maybe a little heavy this week, we want to, of course, share some good news. So last week, in honor of Veterans Day, 451 schools in Florida received the prestigious Purple Star School of Distinction designation.
And this distinction honors districts that demonstrate a strong district-wide commitment to meeting the unique needs of military families that ensures educational continuity for students of active duty service members. Congratulations to all the schools that received this important designation. Obviously, we have a large number of military bases here in the state of Florida. So we serve a lot of students whose parents are active military, and they certainly do have a unique experience. And obviously they are oftentimes moving a good bit. So to have these schools have the things in place to help those students when they transition to a new school or have to pick up in the middle of the year, it's really important.
Absolutely. So the rest of this week, we are in an active committee week here in Tallahassee. So next week's episode, you can look forward to updates about the bills that are moving and the committee discussions at the state level. We hope you will join us in the future. Again, congratulations to all the schools that earned that special designation. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future. So stay tuned.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica Janasiewicz. Podcast was produced by Jeff Willoughby. Original musical recordings by David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topics, suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@facet.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.